So hey, we are continuing in our series Bear Fruit, and this has been a whole lot of fun to go through, and we recognize that kind of the whole idea is a little bit silly with a bear being on there. But today, I'm actually going to kind of talk about something that is kind of serious and that we're going to kind of get to it. But before we do that, I do want to just kind of do some silliness ahead of time. So hopefully you had a great weekend. Were there any Georgia fans here? Yeah, great, awesome. It's great to be a fan when you win, right? So who are my winning fans here today? Who won? Yay, great. So you guys know by now, I'm a Georgia Tech fan, and we lost, right? We're a bunch of losers. We didn't just lose, now we're losing in impressive fashion, right? 45-0. Yeah, any Auburn fans also? Yeah, so give them a hug, right? Give all of us a hug, because it's not fun to lose things, right? Nobody really enjoys losing, right? There's never been somebody that pulled open their bank app or their stock portfolio and was like, oh, I'm losing money. Look at that. Goody. It's great, right? Guys, we've never looked in the mirror and been like, oh, cool, I'm losing my hair. This is awesome. Yeah, I love that, right? And, nobody opens up the ESPN app and, sees that the star quarterback is lost for the season because he dislocated his hip, It's just, well, the Auburn fans actually probably did. You guys are mean. That's not nice.
We got backup.
Okay, yeah, you got backups, right. So it hurts to lose, okay? But we know this. We live in Atlanta, right? We're well-versed in losing, right? Our teams have experienced our fair share of losses. And oftentimes, I realize that sometimes it hurts to even lose things that you never had, right? So somebody promised me that there was going to be a Waffle House on the corner of Rockaway and 74, right? And now all I have is a Panera and a dentist office. I didn't ask for a dentist office. I didn't want a dentist office. And now I'm lamenting the loss of my Waffle House that I never had. So it hurts to lose. If you have your Bible, if you'll turn to John chapter 15, this is going to be where we're going to live in our time today. But also, I want to kind of draw your awareness to the fact that we know and we're aware of that there is a way that losing is not always a bad thing and that it doesn't have to hurt all the time. There's a phenomenon in life when losing isn't a lost cause, right? And kind of the idea that I want you to think about this morning is this idea of that there are some times where there's a cutback in life. There's a time where we lose things and things kind of go away, but it doesn't have to end up being a bad thing. And there's simple examples of this, right? You cut back your calories and you start to lose weight and you're like, oh, hey, I actually like this version of me a little bit better. You go and you push yourself in the gym, you kind of lose your comfort, you cut back and you destroy muscles, they come back stronger. Sure, you get it, right? There's an editing process. You have this, all of this stuff that you've written or created, and then you slice it down, you cut it back. You had like a 45-minute sermon and you try to get it down to 25 so that people don't want to leave halfway through. Just for example, whatever. But even this, people now, right? We used to all have these giant big houses, and now people that are getting older are like, I want a tiny house. I want something small. Marie Kondo has made millions of dollars telling people that they need to throw away stuff that they bought 3 months ago, right? With this whole minimalism thing. And what happens is that somehow we find out that getting rid of the extra space, of the extra stuff, of the distractions and of the excess actually allows people to focus more, to really hone in and to enjoy and to find out that they found more peace, more joy, and more presence in their life. So I'm going to advocate today for a process that all of us need in our life. And this process is the process of pruning. You see, I want to tell you that we need this process in our life. And this is a process that we see happening in the world, and you can see it work, in your own backyard if you want to. Here's a cool little video about how pruning works. It's pretty simple. Somebody just kind of comes in there and snips something off, says, nope, we're not going to direct our energy over there. We're going to direct it right here. And so what was going to go in all these different places and be this wasted energy now goes into this one specific place for the purpose producing fruit. Gardener kind of comes in and says, we're going to snip this off and we're going to direct your energy over here. Now, in a plant, that's like, okay, cool. But then the minute that you kind of start trying to apply this to your own life and go, okay, we're just going to kind of cut some things off and, direct our energy elsewhere, it's like snip, snap, snip, snap. This looks like it might be a little bit painful, right? And the truth is, you're right. The process of pruning, of losing things, of having things taken away from us is painful. But what I want you to kind of understand as we jump right in here is that the process of pruning is painful, but it can also be incredibly productive. So you're not going to want this process to come into your life for one reason, because it's painful, but it has this ability to produce something in your life that you couldn't get any other way. And the benefit far outweighs the cost. But you know this, right? You know this because you do this. You find out that there are behaviors in your life that you need to cut back. There are attitudes, where you need to say, I just need to get rid of this. You challenge yourself, you push yourself, you edit your life and your story in order to do things that are better. And when we're at our best, when you and I are at our best, we can kind of do this process for ourselves. We can limit ourselves, we can kind of do this self-pruning activity. But the second thing I need you to kind of understand is we don't only just all need this process in our life. You and I also need a person in our life who will sometimes direct this process for us. See, you and I need a person who will challenge us beyond where we will take ourselves. And maybe you've had this person in your life, a coach or a trainer or a boss or a teacher. Somebody who used this pruning process and took your focus or your attention or your activities and said, nope, not over here, not over there. We're going to take some things away and focus you and hone you in order to get the best out of you. And we need this person in our life. And the person that we need to act in this way like a gardener. All these people kind of functioned as a gardener in your life, and they would use these pruning shears of discipline to come into your life and use reward and pain and challenge in order to focus your energy so that you become better, the best version of yourself, and produce more fruit. And the first person that did this for all of us was our parents. Right? A parent's job, they understand it's kind of to take this raw material of their child that wants to go in all these different directions and to focus it and to hone it and to prod it and to prune it into something greater. And in John 15, Jesus takes all these ideas and kind of combines them together and tells us something incredibly powerful about God and how he relates to us. So he begins by just saying this. He says, I'm the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Jesus says, he takes this metaphor of a vine and a gardener, and he's going to use this to tell us something incredibly important about how his relationship with God works, and because of that, how our relationship with God can work. Look what he says. He says, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he, my Father, takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it might bear more fruit. Before we go in, I just got to your mind might go in a specific direction, and I think a lot of pastors and teachers have gone in this direction before. They say, well, Jesus is already kind of using this, and he's talking about salvation and kind of who's in and who's out, and there are people, if they're in him, but they're not doing good things, they get cut off, and I want to encourage you to not think about it this way, because I think what Jesus is doing right here is he's just reflecting on how God works in his life. He's looking back at how God has acted towards him, and by extension, how God acts towards us. And essentially what he's saying is, God parents me. There's things in my life that I'm doing that maybe aren't the best thing, and God, like a parent, comes in and cuts those things off. And other things that have the potential to be good, he prunes and he holds and he hones. In a garden, this is called pruning. In a family, this is just called parenting. Right? And again, you know this because you do this. Anybody who's had children, who's been a child, knows that sometimes kids do stuff that just need to stop. There's no fruit in it, right? We all grew up and we all picked our nose, right? There was fruit up there, but you're not supposed to get it. It's supposed to stay up there. And so the parent comes in and it's like, no, there's no fruit there, right? That behavior, just cut it off. Don't do it, right? But then there's other behaviors that they have that it's like, this is pretty good, but it needs to be honed. It needs to be pruned. It needs to be, kind of dialed in. And so you practice sports with your kids. You make them work on their chores. You force them in the morning to brush their teeth and wear underwear. That's just our family, actually. We still have to remind our 10-year-old about that. But why do we do this? Why do parents do this? Is it just because it's this like awful rite of passage that like our parents did to us, and so like you have to pass it on to your kids? No, you do this for your children because you love them. Because you care about them, because you want the best for their life. The gardener prunes the plant because he cares about it, loves it, and wants it to be productive. And the Bible tells us that God treats us in this exact same way for the exact same reason. So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn with me now to Hebrews chapter 12. And in the beginning of this passage, the writer of Hebrews pulls from a proverb in Proverbs 3, and I want to read it to you. He says this. He says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in." So the author of Hebrews is trying to bring this idea into our life and to say, yes, all of us undergo these painful cutbacks where life kind of deals us a hand and we're just like, this is not fun. This is not enjoyable. I'm not liking this right now. It brings back memories of childhood, when your parents were like, no, go to your room. You're in trouble. No, you're not allowed to do that. And he says, listen, hang in here, because what this is actually evidence of is it's evidence that God loves you and that he delights in you. So this big idea that I want you to kind of wrap your mind around first and foremost is just that God prunes us because he loves us. But if we're honest, this is hard to receive, right? The writer of Hebrews is calling us back to mind. He says, don't despise this, don't resent this, but it's hard. All of us do. We all remember our parent telling us no. And we all remember that internal like, you're just doing this because you want to control me. You're just doing this. This is unfair, I remember telling my dad that, it's like when he'd be like, you have to go outside and do your chores. And I said, you just had us so we could be your slaves. Right? And now my kids tell that to me. It's this beautiful, process that we're all in. But it's hard, right? It wasn't until much later in life that I could look back and appreciate what it is that they were doing. And maybe you've experienced this too as an adult, right? Maybe you lost a job. And in the middle of that, you were just like, oh, this is so hard. Why is this happening? But then afterwards, you look back and you're like, man, I was working outside of my passion. I was in some place that I didn't need to be in. Maybe it was the loss of a relationship. You were like, I love this person. We're meant for each other. This is the best thing ever. And then that relationship deteriorated and you're going, why, God? Why would you do this? Why couldn't you have saved this? And you look back and you go, I would have been miserable with that person. This was not where I needed to be. Maybe there's even times where you go through financial stress, right? A cutback in your finances where there's less than you used to have. In the beginning, it's like, oh my gosh, you think all the things that I couldn't have. But through that stress, you realize that, you can actually make do with a lot less than you've been working with. And you realize that there was this excess and there was this waste that was going on in your life, and God used that experience to prune you and to make you bear more fruit, even with sickness and with injury, right? You can get to these places and you can go, oh, I feel terrible. There's nothing good can come from this. But then you realize, I've been living an incredibly unhealthy lifestyle. I need to make some changes. I need to do better and become better. These cutbacks, and the reason why I'm trying to highlight this is because there are things that we would have never done for ourselves. Losses that we would have never willingly taken ourselves through. But on the other side, and here's the thing, maybe we even fought against in the moment. But on the other side, later we realized they were exactly what we needed. Now, I had this experience, this is very, very recent with the whole experience at Legacy. The 8 years of my life, I'm at this church and going through all these experiences, and so many times for probably about 2.5 years at the end, nightly going, God, change this. God, fix this. God, here, how can we do this so everything works and everybody's happy and it all makes sense? And God says, I want to do something different. And now, today, I can still look back and go, was that incredibly painful? Yes, absolutely. It's still painful. But now I know, and I can start to begin to see how God's doing something new that couldn't have been done any other way. I believe these experiences are so hard to process, though, for all of us, because when life is painful and when it's not going the way that we want it to, we're tempted to believe that God's absent. Or even worse, maybe we're tempted to believe that God's punishing us for mistakes that we've made. Oftentimes we experience pain as rejection by God. But here's the part where I really need you to pay attention, because the Bible actually says that it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Look at where the author of Hebrews goes. He says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? And then he says this, if you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Hardship isn't evidence of God's rejection. It's evidence of your legitimacy as his child. Let me say that again. Hardship isn't evidence of God's rejection. It's evidence of your legitimacy as his child. And I get that this is kind of strange at first, right? This idea doesn't really land immediately with us, but I think it makes sense if you really think about it. We've been in times in public places where you see a kid who's out there who's acting up, and there's this impulse inside of you, you're like, somebody better get that kid into shape, right? And there's this do I need to step in and do I need to say something? But then there's a thought that goes inside of you where you go, hey, listen, that's not my kid. That's not my responsibility. It's not my job to correct this kid, to tell him, hey, listen, dude, you're on the wrong path. You're walking down the wrong street. There's trouble up ahead. For some of us, that doesn't stop you. You're just I'm going to tell that kid what's going on. But there's something beautiful that happens and I guess I think about it when you're really close to friends or when you're really close to family, and there's this kid that maybe isn't your kid, but you're close enough that you go, dude, I'm going to treat you like you are my kid. When my kids are acting up at somebody else's house, I tell our friends, we're like, no, you parent them. You discipline them. And it's amazing because it's to say listen, it's like they're one of your own. And so God doesn't see us out in the world screwing up, making foolish choices, or going in a direction that he knows is going to hurt us and be like, it's not my problem. God sees all of his children when we're being wise and when we're being foolish, when we're going on paths that help us and that can hurt us, and goes, this is my job. It's my job to get involved. And he does so, why? Because he loves us, because he is our Father, and because ultimately it's intended for our good. Listen, it goes on, but I get that this still doesn't sit right. And the author of Hebrews recognizes this. Look what he says. He says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. There's not a way to kind of spin this to be this is great. I love this. This is fun. It's not. There's no discipline that's pleasant at the time. He says, but later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. And so this is kind of what we've been saying all morning, right? The process of pruning is painful, but it can also be incredibly productive. It can produce something amazing in your life, and that's what it's intended to do. Remember what Jesus said, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it might bear more fruit. But here's where this idea gets really tough and where it kind of breaks down and where we need to slow down. We've been looking at the end result of this process of pruning, but now we kind of need to stop it and go backwards and acknowledge something. You see, the process of pruning can be productive, but it also can be incredibly painful. And painful in a way that really can stop the process and stop the progress and really do damage to our relationship with God. You see, There's a line that all of us cross when it comes to this idea of discipline, pain, and loss and God that we just don't have any shelf space for. You know, we can all look back on our lives and run some things through this perspective of kind of pain and growth and loss and pruning, and it's helpful. But when you're in the middle of some of this pain, you think there's no way that this can be redeemed. And here's the deal is I know that there's plenty of people who are right here, right now, today, that are in the middle of some of that pain. And what's so hard about that is that type of, this language of like pruning and God's discipline, it just kind of makes the whole thing fall apart. Because all of us kind of go through things that we experience pain and loss that are just too far. They're too far for us. It's, you know, diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's that just eat people's life away. There's suffering that people go through that you're just like, listen, I just can't spin this in a way to make it make sense, right? We know in life that people experience abuse. There's divorce that rips apart families. People go through, you know, periods of incredible darkness and depression. And more than anything, death, right? There's the loss of a child, of a parent, of a loved one, of a friend. And when we try to process these things, we just go, I don't have any space for this, right? I don't have anywhere to put this. And the hard part is that oftentimes in the church, we don't have any place to put those things. There's no shelf space to really kind of put this on and to hold it that makes sense to us. And so one of the things I want to try to do with the little bit of time that we have left is I'm not going to be able to solve this for us, right? This is, on one hand, we're looking at the problem of pain that people have wrestled with for thousands of years, and philosophers really like try and wrestle. So I'm not going to make sense of this for you and be able to put a nice bow on it. But what I do hope to be able to do is at least kind of give you a shelf space to put this on and to hold it so that you can go through a process of trying to make sense of it. You see, we all need this process of pruning in our life. We all need a person to direct that process for us, to take it further than we would go, to do what really needs to be done. But to really get the most out of this, there's a promise that we all need. And it's on this promise that this shelf space lives, where you can put hurt and pain and loss that goes well beyond the place where you can be like, oh, I can connect the dots and see how this all works together. And here's what it isn't. Because so many times when people suffer pain and loss, people, I like to say, use kind of the shield of Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28 says, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And if you've never been in pain and had somebody kind of throw that verse at you, you don't know how unhelpful it is. Because honestly, a lot of times what people seem to be saying with that verse is, you know what, you're in a ton of pain, but it's all good. It's all good. It's, you know, it's listen, God's going to cause all this to work together for good, so it's fine. It's just fine. And what it really does is it makes them feel good, but to the person who's suffering and in pain, it really doesn't do anything. It really kind of, and I think we do that sometimes because, again, we lack the shelf space of how to engage with people in hardship and how to do it for ourselves. And so I want to suggest something new to you. Because instead of just saying, hey, listen, it's all good, you know, I'm going to just kind of gloss over all these things, and God's just going to tie this neat little loop and work everything together for good, even though that's true. Our story is one that goes down into the grave and then up through to resurrection. And this is the part that I think that we really struggle with. You see, the promise is this, is that in the end, everything will be made right because everything will be made new. But this process of being made new often, if not always, involves some kind of death. And that's what's so amazing about the Jesus story. You know, because Jesus certainly had the power to walk into our world and to walk into our lives and just snap his fingers and say, it's all good. All your problems, all of your issues, all the things that you're struggling with, I'm just going to magically, wave my wand and make them go away. But instead, what Jesus did was he went through a process that he was the first one to go through and then invites us to do the same thing. And what Jesus did was, in the midst of hardship and in the midst of pain, in the midst of suffering, he still held on to God. He still said, I'm going to trust God right here in the middle of it. He took all of his grief. He didn't hide it. He didn't minimize it. He didn't, wave his magic wand and make it go away. He held on to God. And he also invited those around him, his friends, his community, into that process to hold on to each other. See, Jesus in his last moments, was in this garden, was struggling, and he said, listen, my soul's overwhelmed. He said, I'm troubled. He didn't hide any of the pain that he was going through. He invited those people to come into it. And then through that, he submitted to death and then came back out with resurrection. And on the other side, he was made new. And when we look at the end of the story, there's this amazing promise that we get in Revelation. I'm going to read from the beginning of Revelation 21. It says, listen, I heard this loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he'll dwell with them. They'll be his people, and God himself will be their God. And a couple of weeks ago, when I was talking about worry and fear, the bottom line that we came back to was this idea that we don't worry because God's present. He's present with us. And the end of the story is God saying, listen, I want to be involved right there with people's pain. And then look at this beautiful promise that he says. It says, when God's with his people, what does he do? It says, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Here's what we struggle with. If you've lost a child, if you've lost a friend, if you've lost a parent, if you've lost years of your life in a broken relationship, if you've lost tons of money in a bad business deal, if you've lost, anything, what we all struggle with is, what happened to the things that I lost? How do I get them back? Those things were important to me. When God came in with his snip, snap, scissors, he cut off too much. I need those things back. How do I get them back to me? And the answer is, I think this is the part that we don't know exactly how this works, but this is what comforts me. It says, God's going to wipe every tear from their eyes. And so all of the things that grieve us, all the things that break our hearts, that tells me that God's going to go through a process of making that okay by making it new. And so I don't know how this works, but when God wipes away every tear, that's more than, there now, child, don't cry. It's that every lost thing will somehow be found. Every broken thing will somehow be fixed. Every dead thing will somehow come to life. And every sad thing will somehow come true because God is making all things new. And that's the thing that we have to hold on to, is that in this process, God's making all things new. And here's our invitation, is if we will hold on to that perspective, God can use you as a vessel to make this new thing right here, right now, that you can taste and see and touch. You can find a new hope. You can find a new comfort that doesn't minimize any of those things, but that right in the middle of the hardest things of life still finds fruit, peace, life, and joy. I want to leave you with one final picture, and then the band's going to come up. So there's this process, right, of producing fruit. You prune it, and then, instead of all the energy going to one place, it goes to producing fruit. You get grapes and berries and all these wonderful things. But then we know that there's another process. A process that picks those berries off the vine, and you go, great, it's done. But it really just begins a whole nother one. There's this wine-making process where this fruit that you go, that was the purpose, right? We got the fruit, we're done. And he says, no, I want to make something new. And that fruit gets crushed, and it gets pressed, and it gets put into a dark place. Maybe it seems like it's been forgotten. And it seems like all this kind of acid and energy and bitterness kind of comes up, but then it generates something new. And as the process happens on the other side, where there was once just fruit, now there's wine. And God wants to take you and I through that process. The question is, in the middle of it, will we hold on to him? Will we still believe that he's good? Let's continue to pray. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for the chance to just read these truths. Lord, it's hard. God, your word said it.